Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us.
Always exciting to be back.
Today we're looking at something that on the surface might seem kind of academic, but we promise it's really fascinating.
Yeah, this is going to be a good one.
We're going to be cracking open Chapter 12 of Salking,
Oh, yeah, sunking.
which is all about designing different types of test questions.
Mm,
And now you might think, well, this is only interesting if you're a teacher.
right.
But actually, I think this is going to be really interesting for anyone who's ever taken a test.
And that's pretty much everyone.
Yeah. So we're talking multiple choice, true, false, matching all those fun things.
All the classics.
Yeah. And I think we're going to learn a lot about just how much goes into making a really good question.
Yeah, I think you're going to be surprised by some of the rules that he lays out.
I know. I definitely was reading through this chapter. I was like, huh, I never would have thought of that.
It really makes you think about all those tests you've taken in the past.
Yeah, for sure. Okay.
Yep.
So I think a good place to start is just like the basic breakdown of question types.
Yeah, sounds good.
So sulking divides test questions into two main categories, selection and supply.
Okay.
So selection is all about picking the right answer from a set of options.
So like multiple choice.
Exactly. So multiple choice, true, false matching, all those fall under selection.
Gotcha.
Then supply is where you have to come up with the answer yourself.
So like essay questions?
Yeah, or short answer.
Okay.
Now here's a bit of a curveball.
Oh,
Fill in the blank questions. Those are kind of a hybrid
interesting.
because you are supplying the answer, but there's usually only one correct word or phrase that fits.
So it's scored like a selection question.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So for this deep dive, we're going to be focusing on those pure, objectively scored question types.
Okay, so multiple choice, true, false matching.
Yeah, we're going to hit all the big ones.
Those are the ones that really bring back the memories.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So let's just jump right in and start with maybe the most familiar format, multiple choice.
Everyone's favorite,
Right. I mean, love them or hate them, we've all done a million of these.
1,000,001. But Salkind goes beyond just like, how to answer them. He actually talks about how to design really good multiple choice questions.
Okay, so like what separates a good multiple choice question from a bad one?
Yeah, that's what we're going to get into, and it's fascinating.
I'm intrigued.
So first he breaks down like the anatomy of a multiple choice question.
Okay.
You've got the stem, which is the question itself.
Right.
Then the keyed answer, which is obviously the correct choice.
Mm-hmm.
And then those tricky wrong answers, those are called distractors.
Distractors, I like that.
Yeah, this is where it gets interesting because he really emphasizes that those distractors shouldn't just be random wrong answers.
Oh, so they have a specific purpose.
Exactly. They need to be plausible enough that someone who hasn't mastered the material might actually choose them.
So it's not just about knowing the right answer, it's about understanding why those other answers are wrong.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes a good multiple choice question challenging and effective.
It's like they're testing your understanding on multiple levels.
Right, so let's dive into some of the specific rules that Salking outlines for creating these like masterful multiple choice questions.
Okay, lay it on me.
Okay, first one. Did you know that 4 or 5 answer choices are ideal?
Oh, really? I wouldn't have guessed that.
Me neither. But he explains that if you have fewer choices, it makes it too easy to guess.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And if you have too many, it can actually become overwhelming and less effective.
So it's about finding that sweet spot.
Exactly. Okay, ready for another one.
Hit me.
Avoid using negatives in the stem or answers.
Oh, that's interesting.
Apparently, our brains are wired to think in positive terms.
That makes sense.
So throwing in a not or an except just adds unnecessary mental gymnastics.
And it can make the question more confusing than it needs to be.
Right. The goal is to assess knowledge, not create confusion.
For sure. Clarity is key.
And he gives this great example using the word mirepoix, which is a French culinary term. And he shows how a poorly worded question could technically be answered correctly based on grammar alone, even if you have no idea what a mirepoix is.
Oh, wow. So it's like a trick question.
Yeah, it's a hilarious way to illustrate how those sneaky grammatical hints can totally skew the results.
Yeah, you got to be careful with those.
Okay, another important point he makes is that each multiple choice question should stand on its own.
What does that mean?
You shouldn't be able to figure out the answer to one question based on information given in another.
So no chain reactions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No sneaky connections between questions.
Got it.
Okay, ready to move on to a format that I think strikes fear into the heart of many test takers.
Oh, which one is that?
Matching questions.
Oh, yeah, those can be tough.
It's like multiple choice on steroids.
With a whole grid of
Yeah,
options.
whole column of stems to match with a pool of
And
answers.
they're usually all within the same general topic.
Right, so random guessing is a lot harder.
Yeah, you got to actually know the material.
And Salking actually includes a sample matching section from a statistics course.
Oh, no stats.
I know, right?
Ooh.
And I have to admit, I stumbled on a few of them.
Well, that makes me feel better.
It really shows how those questions force you to understand the relationships between terms, not just the definitions in isolation.
So it's a higher level of thinking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's break down some of the key rules for crafting good matching sections.
All right, let's hear them.
So one important principle is to always have more answer choices than stems.
Okay, why is that?
Well, it keeps you on your toes, and it prevents those last-minute, well, this one's the only one left, guesses.
Ah, so it eliminates process of elimination.
Exactly. And he also suggests allowing for answers to be used more than once or not at all.
Oh, that's tricky.
Yeah, it adds another layer of complexity.
So you really got to think it through.
And just like with multiple choice, clarity is key. So those topics in a matching section should be logically grouped so it all flows together.
So you're not jumping all over the place.
Right. And it ensures that the questions are actually assessing knowledge within a specific domain.
Okay, that makes sense.
So we've covered multiple choice and matching, which are both about picking the right answer from a set of options. But now let's talk about a format that seems deceptively simple.
Okay, I'm listening.
True-false questions.
Oh, true, false. Everyone thinks those are easy.
Right, but they can actually be incredibly tricky.
How so?
Well, the statement has to be completely and unequivocally true or false.
No room for gray areas.
Exactly, and that's where people get tripped up.
I can see that.
They start thinking, well, it's mostly true, but...
Yeah, and then you start second guessing yourself.
Exactly, and he gives this great example with the statement, a minute is 60 seconds.
Okay, seems pretty straightforward.
Right, but then he points out that if you're talking about concepts like time dilation in physics...
Oh, right. Time can be relative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So suddenly it's not so clear-cut.
So even a seemingly simple statement can have hidden complexities.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of crafting those statements with laser precision.
So how do you write a good true-false question?
Well, first, remember how easy it is to guess on true-false questions.
Yeah, 50-50 chance.
Right. So Salking suggests having a lot of them to minimize the impact of random guessing.
Okay, so quantity over quality.
Well, not exactly. Quality is still important, but having a larger sample size helps to balance out those lucky guesses.
Gotcha.
It's also important to aim for a roughly equal number of true and false statements.
So you don't want to skew the test one way or the other.
Exactly. You want to keep things balanced and fair.
Makes sense.
And then another tip is to avoid using lengths as a clue.
What do you mean?
Well, sometimes true statements can get overly wordy in an attempt to make them completely defensible.
Oh, so the length of the statement could give away the answer.
Exactly. So you don't want to tip off test takers with word count.
Okay, so keep it concise.
Yes. And the last tip for true-false questions is to stick to one idea per statement.
No double-barreled questions.
All right. Keep it clean, clear, and focused on one specific point.
That makes sense.
Now, here's a fascinating insight from the book that really surprised me.
Oh, I love these little nuggets of wisdom.
Research has shown that students tend to pick true when they're unsure.
Really?
And true statements are actually easier to write.
Huh. So there's like a built-in bias towards true and true-false questions?
It seems that way.
That's something to keep in mind when designing these types of questions.
Definitely. You want to be aware of those subtle biases and try to mitigate them.
For sure.
Okay, so we've tackled the big three of objectively scored selection questions, multiple choice matching, and true-false.
The holy trinity of test-taking?
But there's another category that kind of bridges the gap between selection and supply.
Okay, tell me more.
Short answer and fill-in-the-blank questions.
Oh, yeah, those are interesting.
They're often considered a step up in difficulty because you're not given any options you have to produce the answer completely on your own.
No more multiple choice crutch.
Exactly. And Salking points out that these are primarily used for assessing lower-level thinking that straight-up knowledge recall.
So knowing the facts.
Exactly. But even though they seem simple, there's still some key things to keep in mind when crafting them.
Okay, like what?
Well, one tip is to favor short answer over fill-in-the-blank whenever possible.
Why is that?
Because short answer questions offer more clarity and reduce the potential for ambiguity.
Ah, so it's about being precise.
Exactly. And they actually use a great example involving T cells to illustrate this difference.
Okay.
So a fill-in-the-blank question like, the precursors of T cells leave the bone marrow and mature in the blank, could have multiple technically correct answers.
I see what you mean.
like body or system.
Right. They would both fit grammatically.
Exactly. But a short answer question like, in what gland do T cells mature, forces the test taker to be much more specific.
So it eliminates that wiggle room.
Right? And similar to the multiple choice pitfalls, be careful to avoid grammatical giveaways in these questions.
So no subtle hints.
Exactly, the wording should be clear and unbiased.
Got it.
And they have another fun example about Hippocrates, showing how even the choice of a versus an before the blank can accidentally reveal information about the answer.
Wow, it's amazing how those little details can make a difference.
It really shows how important it is to pay attention to every word, every grammatical nuance.
Especially when you're trying to design a fair and accurate assessment.
Absolutely. And a final tip for fill in the blanks, one blank at the end is best.
More sentences riddled with holes.
Exactly. Keep it simple and focused.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now, Salkind wraps up this chapter on question types with a really interesting concept, the validity-reliability paradox when it comes to objectively scored questions.
Okay, that sounds intriguing.
It's a bit of a head-scratcher, but it gets to the heart of what we're actually trying to measure with these tests.
So what's the paradox?
Well, on the one hand, you could argue that these objectively scored questions like multiple choice or true-false have high validity.
Because a correct answer demonstrates knowledge of a specific fact.
Exactly. So if you're testing for basic knowledge, recall, those questions can be pretty effective.
Right.
But on the other hand, if you're trying to measure deeper understanding critical thinking or the ability to apply knowledge in a new situation,
Then those questions might fall short.
right? Because simply knowing a fact doesn't mean you can analyze it, connect it to
Oh.
other concepts, or use it to solve a problem.
So it's like there are different levels of understanding.
Exactly. And then there's the whole issue of reliability.
Okay.
Guessing introduces randomness into the equation.
Right, which could lower the reliability of the results.
But then wouldn't you argue that the very nature of objective scoring actually increases reliability?
How so?
Because it removes any subjectivity from the grading process.
Oh, I see what you mean. So it's consistent no matter who's scoring the test.
Exactly. So it's like a tug of war between factors that both increase and decrease the reliability of these question types.
That is a paradox.
Right. And I think that's what makes this whole topic so fascinating.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it than meets the eye.
Definitely. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive into test question design, but there's still so much more to explore, so we'll pick up right where we left off in our next part.
Can't wait to keep going.
Me too. See you then.
See, so it really highlights how important it is to think carefully about what you're trying to measure with a test.
Right, like what's the goal?
If it's just basic knowledge recall, maybe those objectively scored questions are fine.
Yeah.
But if you want to see deeper understanding,
Yeah.
then you might need different kinds of questions.
It's like choosing the right tool for the job.
Exactly.
Like a hammer is great for nails, but not so much for sawing wood.
You got it.
So this whole discussion about validity and reliability, it's making me rethink those multiple choice questions.
Yeah, me too.
There's a lot more to them than I realized.
For sure.
And Salkind, he makes another point that I think is really important.
Okay.
He says, understanding how these questions are designed can make you a better test taker.
Interesting. So it's like knowing the tricks of the trade.
Yeah, exactly. And I was thinking about this, like, how does that actually help you when you're taking a test?
Well, think about those multiple choice questions with the distractors.
Right.
If you understand how those are designed,
Wow.
you're less likely to fall for them.
It's like you can see through the tricks
Right. You can spot the patterns and avoid the traps.
and focus on the real knowledge.
Exactly.
So it's like having a secret decoder ring.
I like that analogy.
And this applies to other question types too, like true-false.
Okay.
Remember how we talked about how those statements have to be absolutely true or false? So if you understand that, you'll be more careful about looking for those little loopholes or exceptions.
So you don't get tricked by something that's almost true.
Exactly. And I think this also helps you study more effectively.
How so?
Well, if you know what kind of thinking the questions are targeting, you can tailor your study strategies.
So like if it's a lot of short answer factual recall questions, then you focus on memorizing those key terms and definitions.
But if it's more about applying the knowledge in different situations,
Then you need to study differently.
right, you need to really understand the concepts deeply.
So it's about working smarter, not harder.
Exactly. And Salkind doesn't just give us these tips. He also challenges us to think critically about the tests we've taken.
What do you mean?
He asks us to think about a recent test we took and apply these design principles to evaluate the questions.
Oh, that's interesting.
He says, could any of those questions have been improved?
I like that.
What kinds of questions would really assess deep understanding?
It's like turning the tables and becoming the test designer.
Right. And I think that's a really valuable exercise.
Yeah, even if you're not a teacher.
It helps you see those questions from a different perspective.
And you start to appreciate the challenges of crafting good questions.
Yeah, for sure. So we've explored a lot of the technical aspects of test question design.
Right?
But I think this deep dive is about so much more than that.
I agree.
It's about how we learn, how we assess understanding.
And how to become more effective learners.
Exactly. And it's fascinating how something as seemingly simple as a test question
Yeah.
can lead to all these bigger questions about knowledge and learning.
It's like we're peeling back the layers.
Right. And I think Salkind is giving us the tools to become more conscious and deliberate learners.
Not just passive test takers.
Exactly. It's about taking ownership of your learning
Understanding the system.
and using that knowledge to your advantage.
I like that.
So he challenges us to look at those tests we've taken
Yeah.
and think about how those questions could have been better.
And what kinds of questions would really get at deep understanding?
Yeah, and I love that challenge.
Me too.
Because it encourages us to become active participants in the assessment process.
Not just recipients of a grade.
Right. It's about engaging with those questions critically
Thinking about their strengths and weaknesses
and considering how they could be better designed.
to truly measure what we know and can do.
Exactly. So as we're wrapping up this part of our deep dive into test questions,
What's the key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
I hope they'll start to see tests, quizzes,
Yeah.
exams, whatever, as opportunities for reflection and growth.
Not just something to be dreaded.
Right. Each question is a chance to assess your understanding.
And pinpoint those areas where you might need to learn more.
Exactly. It's about embracing the challenge.
And seeing those questions as stepping stones on your path to mastery.
Not just hurdles to clear.
And even if you're not the one writing the tests,
Yeah.
understanding the principles behind them can give you a whole new level of awareness and control.
It's like you're no longer wandering through a maze blindly.
Right. You have a map, you can see the bigger picture.
And you can navigate that learning journey with more confidence and purpose.
Yeah, it's amazing how like a test question can spark all these big ideas.
Right. It's like we're going down this rabbit hole of like, what is learning?
And how do we even know if we know something?
Exactly.
It's making me realize there's so much more to tests than I ever thought about. Yeah, it's like we've been looking at them so narrowly, just focused on getting the right answer.
Right. It's like check the box, move on.
But now it's like we're zooming out, seeing the bigger picture.
Yeah, like who created this question? Why did they create it this way?
And how does that affect what we learn?
It's like sulking is giving us this whole new perspective.
It's, yeah, like he's letting us in on the secrets.
And I think that's really empowering.
It is. It's like you're not just a passive test taker anymore.
Right. You can understand the system and use it to your advantage.
And that brings us back to that challenge she gives at the end.
Oh, yeah, where he asks us to think about a recent test we took.
Mm-hmm. And look at those questions with this new lens.
Could they have been better? What would make them really assess deep understanding?
I love that challenge.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's like we get to be the test designers for a minute.
And it makes you think critically about what makes a good question.
Right. And I think that's a skill that goes way beyond test taking.
Absolutely. It's about being a more thoughtful learner.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you hope our listeners will take away from this?
I hope they'll see tests not as like these scary obstacles, but as chances to learn and grow.
Yeah, like each question is an opportunity to figure out what you know and what you don't know.
Exactly. And to embrace that challenge.
And even if you don't love taking tests,
Which, let's be honest, who does?
understanding how they work can make you feel more confident and in control.
It's like you have a roadmap for your learning journey.
So to everyone listening out there, next time you have a test, remember what we talked about today.
Yeah, think about those questions critically.
And use that knowledge to show what you've learned.
And maybe even enjoy the challenge a little bit.
That's the goal, right?
Ha.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a fascinating conversation.
I agree. Always a pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring and keep learning.